Senior Founding Director of the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper. She served as Executive Director and Riverkeeper for 2 decades and continues to assist Chattahoochee Riverkeeper as a Senior Advisor. Sally was one of the first women in America to become a riverkeeper, a vocal defender of a specific waterway who holds polluters accountable. In her book, Keeping the Chattahoochee, which she has with her tonight, she has copies available to purchase after the program, she tells stories that range from joyous and funny to frustrating, even alarming, to illustrate what it takes to save an endangered river. Her tales are triggered by the regular walks she takes through a forest to the Chattahoochee over the course of a year, finding solace and kinship in nature. One of our reasons for wanting to invite Sally, and I think we've had you booked for like 9 months or something, was that if you're not from Coweta County or if you're not aware, the Chattahoochee does flow through our county. We have the beautiful Chattahoochee Bend State Park. If you've not gone there, I highly suggest you visit. We're very, very lucky to have this available in our community. So we thought everyone would like to learn more about the river. Thank you. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Thank you. Let's see if this thing is on. They've got all this gear on me and I don't know if any of it works.
I think it is. Hello, hello.
Oh, it is? Okay, good. Okay, great. Great. I will, let's see, we can just pull this over here. I may or may not lean on it. I don't have any notes. How are you all tonight? Are you doing well?
Just tell me when you want to click.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much. Yes, leave it right there. Oh, good. Sorry. Okay, now we're ready. Thank you for coming out on this chilly evening tonight. I'm so happy to be with Master Gardeners. I've talked to a few other Master Gardener groups, the Fulton County group, and I think Cobb County. I've basically been on the road sort of for the last year and a half with my book, talking about it and also about the river and the fact that our organization is celebrating 30 years of working to protect this river. And so what I would like to talk to you tonight about is what is a riverkeeper? You know, what do we do? Why do we do it? Why do we even have to exist? Excuse me. And talk a little bit about the quality of the river out here, the Chattahoochee, and talk some about my book. But I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. I know that the other Master Gardener groups that I've worked with and talked to have all had great questions. I mean, you all know a lot, you know, so, but I don't want to assume everybody knows everything. And so I wanted to start with maps and with the talk about the river basin itself, where it starts, where it goes, that sort of thing. Did any of you all grow up here in this area? Okay, we've got a few. Do you remember what the river of the Chattahoochee was like 30 or 40 years ago? What? How would you describe it?
You wouldn't want to get in it.
You wouldn't want to get in it? Nasty? Why? With Atlanta? Well, in truth, all of us do some pollutant, but with that big old Atlanta upstream, there certainly was a lot coming out of the city. And what we're looking at right here, and what we're going to talk about today, is how the river is so much cleaner and what it's taken to do that. So we're looking on the right there. There is a map of the 14 major river basins in Georgia. Who can tell me what a river basin is? Anybody?
Drains, or
Say it again.
water drains into the river?
It's a land area that, when the rain falls on the land, flows over, under, and it drains into a particular river. And there are ridges so that if it rains over in that dark green area, it's going to end up in the Flint River. The flesh-colored area, it rains there, it's going to end up in the Chattahoochee River. And so it's important to understand how rivers work to resolve some of the problems and to learn how to appreciate them, and how we have all these communities from the top down to the bottom dependent on this river. The Chattahoochee is is the most heavily used river in the state of Georgia. And can anybody tell me what What are some of the uses for the Chattahoochee, or for any river, really, but specifically the Chattahoochee? Hang on a second. Hydropower, yeah, right. What's up? Recreation, absolutely. Drinking water. Agriculture, exactly. Irrigation, right. What else?
They still bring barges up to...
Navigation, they don't bring many barges up, but they still, at times, release water out of Lake Lanier up there at the top to have enough flow, 9-foot flow down here to bring barges up. It's still an authorized purpose of Lake Lanier up there at the top. We'll talk about that. So navigation, yep. What else? Think of any others?
Animal habitat.
Yeah, wildlife habitat, exactly. And the last one that I think is really important is the one that most groups don't think about. When you flush your toilet, where does everything go? It goes off to the sewer, and then where does it go? And then where does it go? After the treatment plant. Back in the river, exactly. It goes back in the river. And so what we hope is that the treatment plants are doing their job and that they're treating the waste sufficiently. Rivers can assimilate a certain amount of waste, and which is a good thing because they certainly get a lot of waste, particularly from big urban areas. Runoff from farms is a huge problem throughout the United States. The chemicals and such put on agricultural lands. And so whatever is happening back to the river basin, whatever is happening in that big river basin on the land or being piped into the river is going to affect the quality and quantity of the water as it flows on downstream. And you see here, of course, that the Chattahoochee River Basin is funny looking. It's like a snake. It's skinny. It starts way up there in northeast Georgia and straddles the Alabama-Georgia line, and then, of course, meets the Flint River down at Lake Seminole to become the Apalachicola River, and down, comes on down. Has anybody been down to Apalachicola, St. George Island? I'm going tomorrow. I haven't been in years, and I'm so excited. I can't stand it. So this whole area, the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint River Basin, is something like 20,000 square miles. And in that area, you've got a lot of people. Municipalities need drinking water and all the other uses that we talked about. So when there's enough water in the system, it's rained enough, not much of a problem. But the problem comes when there's a drought. And you may remember back in 2006 to early 2009, there was an exceptional drought in the upper Chattahoochee Basin, River Basin, and Lake Lanier went down 19 feet. And these extreme droughts and also intense rainfalls are the sort of thing that we're going to be seeing more with climate change. In fact, a little over a year ago in downtown Atlanta, there was something called a rain bomb, in which the rain in I think it was 15 minutes, 1.75 inches fell right on all that hard surface rooftops in downtown Atlanta. The storm system couldn't handle it, the pipes, and so the water came up 5 feet, cars floated all over the place. The water flowed into one of the college dorms at Clark Atlanta. They had to evacuate the aquarium. It was serious, but that's the kind of thing that is going to be happening more. So understanding how to be resilient when we're going to have more droughts and more intense storms is an important part of water planning. So at the top there, we've got that ring, that orange-red ring there. That is the Metro Water, North Georgia Water Planning District. And Coweta County is in it, and it is 15 counties and 96 cities. 20 years ago, this regional planning agency was established to try to get all those local governments working together better so that they could have more interlocking systems, could plan together and not just be their own little fiefdoms. It's worked to some extent and not so much for other extent. But some definitions of Metro Atlanta actually include 29 counties. So you've got this huge, and you know this, but you can see it here, blob of Metro Atlanta, no geographic boundaries to curtail the growth, spreading, 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 and way up at the top of the river basin, right? You see it's at the Flint, the Chattahoochee, and then the other river basins that aren't delineated there. You can see the Coosa River Basin, and then the what is that, the South River Basin, Ocmulgee. Anyway, why do you think that's a problem, that we've got this big metropolitan area at the top, way upstream in a river basin? Why is there a water management problem there? Speak up a little bit.
The water doesn't absorb into the ground, it just runs off the hard surfaces.
That's true. There's a lot of runoff. It doesn't absorb into the ground. That's true, right? Yes?
With more people, you've got more going in it.
You've got more, that's right. You've got more of the treatment plants. You've got a lot more processing of people's waste and that sort of stuff going into it. But the river is very what up at the top? Small. Very small, because the river is the combination of all the streams flowing into it. And you look, and there's not above, you see Lake Lanier there, up above it. That land area, about, I think it's 1,000 square miles, is the only area in which when the rain falls, it's going to be brought down into the river system, into Lanier and past Atlanta. So the river in Atlanta is a really small river. There is no other major city in the whole country that has such a small land area, watershed area above it that supplies a lot of people with drinking water. So when there's a drought, it's really a big deal, even with Lake Lanier there. And it also is a big deal if you have less water in the river, less ability to assimilate the waste, and people are going to keep on flushing. So, managing this river system is really important. I mean, if you were today looking for where should we put a big giant city in this river basin, you'd be bringing it downstream where you're going to have a whole heck of a lot more water. So it's a pollution issue, and it's also a water quantity issue here. Let's see, what else? So Coweta County, and you're down here, kind of down the bottom, you are half within the Chattahoochee River Basin and half in the upper Flint. You probably know that. So the water, when it falls on Coweta County, and I don't remember the geography, Palmetto, Luthersville, maybe, I think that's in the Flint, and so when it rains there, it's going to head down to the Flint, and then on the other side, it'll be the Chattahoochee, and then it'll meet again down here at Lake Seminole and head on down to Apalachicola Bay. So, any quick questions related to the shed? Yes?
I'd just like to know what the big red dot is at the bottom border of that red.
The big red dot?
Yeah.
You mean the
Along that corner of the Metro Atlanta border, there's a big red dot there.
oh, that says Atlanta? I'm sorry, I'm not really, I mean, there's a rim of...
Yeah, but there's a big red dot there. What is that for?
On the border of the... Oh, down in the bottom, down here. I'm not sure. My eyes must not be as good as yours. I don't know. I didn't make the map, but you mean that little red dot there? I don't really know. I mean, anyway, other questions? Sorry. Question back here?
How do they determine what area is part of the river basin?
It's the terrain. It's the land.
Surely they don't, can they see the water?
It's natural. When the rain hits the ground, it's going to flow somewhere. With gravity, it's going to go downhill. And it's going to go to, it's seeking the sea, goes into little creeks, groundwater, bigger, and keeps on moving. It's completely the terrain, the landscape that dictates where the river basin is. This isn't human. The human part is like these artificial state lines. You know, long ago, someone said it would make a lot more sense to have our government entities along river basins, then everybody could be part of the decision making. instead of Alabama fighting Georgia fighting Florida. Does that make sense? Okay.
Wasn't Atlanta created, I'm not from the South.
Railroad.
It was railroad, so Atlanta wasn't built because it was by a river.
No.
Transportation.
Right.
Atlanta was developed because of railroads.
That's right.
And they didn't care anything about the water.
Well, nobody knew. I mean, nobody knew back in the 1820s or 1840s how big the city was going to grow.
Most of the water system, but Atlanta was not created for water system at all.
No, they didn't imagine that the city would grow so big, so nobody had any idea. And so today we have Lake Lanier at the top. We've got 4 major federal reservoirs, and the Corps of Engineers operates those. Lake Lanier, West Point Reservoir, you all go out there maybe, or fishing or boating. And then you've got a couple more major federal reservoirs, and they regulate, for various purposes, they regulate the flow of the river. So it's not a completely, obviously, free-flowing river. And there are other private dams too, maybe 10, I think, others, like Georgia Power Dams. And down in Columbus, where they've taken a couple dams down and they've got the whitewater system down there. So anyway, yes, and then we're going to go on.
Is Seminole Lake naturally occurring, or is that dammed up?
There are no natural lakes in the South.
So that's
No natural lakes. It's a federal dam. It was authorized by Congress, just like Buford Dam up at Lake Lanier. In the late 1940s, Congress said, we are going to, people from all over the country will pay to build Buford Dam, and it'll be for hydropower, flood control, and navigation. And the big thing was that water supply and recreation, back in the late 40s, they weren't purposes in the authorization. And Mayor Hartsfield even said, why would we need in the city of Atlanta to help pay for that Buford Dam when we've got so much rain? Well, famous last words. So that's a lot of what the fighting has been between the 3 states over the last 30 plus years. And I have a whole chapter in my book about what's going on with the so-called tri-state water wars. So anyway, let's jump. Yes, thank you. So here's the river up in Atlanta in the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area. Has anybody been up there, walked or paddled the river? You have? Yeah. It's an amazing resource. Jimmy Carter signed the law that established the national park in 1978. And I was at Georgia Tech getting my master's in environmental planning and happened to get an internship to do the first management plan for this national park. It's a national recreation area, so it is a unit of the national park system. And it's the 29th most visited out of 420 some national park units in the country. Over 3 million people. The river from Buford Dam down to Peachtree Creek, 48 miles, is the national park, and then about 5,000 plus acres of land along the river. And so it's an amazing resource. And in my book, where the walk that I'll tell you about was within this national park. Okay? So, yes, we all were young once, right? I hesitate to put these pictures up and people go, what? That's not you. So I got the degree environmental planning at Georgia Tech. I was in the right place at the right time in 1993 when Ted Turner's family decided they wanted a Chattahoochee River Keeper program, and that Ted's foundation would help fund with an initial grant a new nonprofit environmental advocacy organization. At the time, I had worked for a couple federal agencies, the EPA, the Park Service. I had worked for the Georgia Conservancy, you know that organization. But I was looking for something more specific, place-based, where we could really use the tools, all the many tools out there to make a real difference. And so I decided to throw my hat in the ring in 1993 and early 94. My sons at the time were 8 and 12. They're a lot older now. And I have my first grandbaby, finally, almost 3 months old. So hooray for me. Anyway, I'm sure you all have many. So Ted Turner's foundation said, here's $50,000. Go forth, and we know that the Chattahoochee River from top to bottom has all kinds of problems. And we know the biggest problem is the fact that for decades, the city of Atlanta has been discharging raw sewage into creeks in the city and into the Chattahoochee River, heading on downstream towards Noonan and everybody else. And that's not the sole reason we were formed 30 years ago, but it was certainly the biggest challenge. We knew that there was developers weren't abiding by erosion control laws, that mud was just heading right into creeks, and we know what that does to water quality and to the life in the creeks and such. And so we knew that there were industries, we just knew there were a lot of problems out there, and a lot of it was ignorance. People didn't know what the problems were or how to resolve them. So we started, as I said, 1994, and we sued the city of Atlanta in federal court in 1995 on the behalf of everybody downstream. And there's several chapters in my book that tell that story and how and why we did that. I'll get back to that in just a second. So over the years, Chattahoochee Riverkeeper has now grown to an organization with an office in LaGrange, in Atlanta, in Gainesville. We have 2 floating classroom boats for kids, one on Lanier and one on West Point Lake that's named the Miss Sally, which is like the best thing that ever happened to me. We have 20 staff now, full-time, part-time, $2.2 million budget, incredible water quality monitoring programs, and I don't know how it happened, because I know where we were in this little donated office space in a basement, 30 years ago. But we had the passion, the professionals, we had good people on our board, and we had some real problems that needed to be resolved, and we worked a lot with the media to divulge what those problems were, using science, data, and facts. Science, data, and facts. That's you got to have those. So we are part of an international waterkeeper movement. And when in 1994 I became the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper, I was in the first group of a dozen or so. There was a riverkeeper. The first one was on the Hudson in New York. There was a San Francisco Baykeeper. There was a Neuse Riverkeeper in North Carolina. There were in Maine and Rhode Island and various other places. And today there are over 300 waterkeepers around the world. And they're called waterkeepers because in some cases like ours, like mine, we're protecting a river. But in some places it's a baykeeper or a sound keeper and so forth. And so it's a family of names. To use it, you have to be licensed by the Waterkeeper Alliance in New York. You have to have one person who's paid full-time to be the ombudsman for the water body. The person will patrol in a boat the water body, be the spokesperson, as I said, and monitor water quality, and then take whatever action is necessary and legal to clean up the river. And so you'll find there are now 9 riverkeepers in Georgia, and you'll find that all of us, if we have to as a last resort, we will go to court to protect the water that belongs to everybody. What percentage of water? 60%. Our heart, our brains, lungs, about 80-something%. There could be nothing more important than having enough clean water for our communities and families. And we've seen places like in Atlanta when the pipes last summer, I don't know if you read about this, for about 6 days, real near my house, but it didn't affect my house. In the center of Atlanta, the drinking water pipes went down. They were so old and hadn't been maintained. So we started creating this organization, and we came downstream, met a lot of the legislators and other people who were so tired of having a polluted river. We got this national park up in Atlanta, and it has had some water quality problems, but below Peachtree Creek, for the 70 or so miles down to West Point Lake, the river had been trashed for decades. And the state's unwritten policy was pretty much, this is going to be the drainage channel for Atlanta. Atlanta's too important, and it costs too much for Atlanta to clean up its act, and so we're not going to do anything. And it was the Georgia Environmental Protection Division's job to make the city of Atlanta, or any other city or county that's not abiding by something called the Federal Clean Water Act, to take action and say, you got to do right, you know? You can't be polluting the people's water. The Georgia EPD never did anything. Neither did the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Atlanta. And so that's why when we came to be in '94 and developed our program and our organization, we knew we had to tackle the city issues. Every time we ever get involved in something that's hard and controversial, we always try to reach out and work with people first. We wrote Bill Campbell. Anybody remember when he was mayor of Atlanta before he went to jail? That guy? Anyway, in the 90s, this was the 90s, and we wrote him and said, because we had lawyers, we had engineers, we had professional people, of course, working with us, and we said, the river is, we've got the data to show that the city of Atlanta is in violation of this federal law called the Clean Water Act, and crickets, never heard back. We'd copied also the state and also the federal agency, never heard anything back. So then we wrote another letter, and there were downstream communities like LaGrange and Troup County and Heard County and a number of other, I think 8 local governments that joined with us in a coalition in writing the government and saying, you're not doing your job. We don't want to have to do it, but we will if you don't do something. So we wrote this letter in July of 1995 called a 60-day notice letter. And again, we heard nothing from anybody about this problem, which everyone had known about for years. Every time it rained in Atlanta, everything you see in your toilet was coming out into creeks running through neighborhoods, my neighborhood including, neighborhoods all over the place, and then into the river and heading down your way. I mean, I described some of it. I won't describe it right now, but what we found, I will tell you one thing, that I went out with a photographer one day. He wanted to see where the city's biggest sewage treatment plant, the Clayton plant, discharges into the river. And we went out, and it was right after a storm. And we both looked around, and every tree along the shore there that had probably been bending over in the storm, because when the water came up, covered with thousands, I'm telling you, thousands of condoms and everything else. This is how bad. I mean, it was this was so bad up there, and the government was doing nothing. So we had this one tool. We had the public's concern. We had the media helping us tell the story as we researched and found out what was all the details. And but we had this thing called the Federal Clean Water Act passed in 1972, bipartisan, overwhelmingly passed to protect public waters, to bring them into, they're not there yet, but the goal is fishable, swimmable, drinkable waters, and for everybody. And so this law that was passed overwhelmingly at a time when rivers were burning, oil was being spilled, things were really a mess in the late 60s and 70s, and people finally said, humans seem to need a crisis before they really try to fix something. Sadly, we are that way. They've passed this law, and in it, they put a provision that said, when the government fails to do its job, citizen groups whose members are affected by the pollution of whatever it is, may go into court, into federal court, and present their evidence to a federal judge. And that law and that provision allowed us to clean up your river. And we filed the lawsuit in October of '95. We won in federal court in November 1997. It's a long time ago. And then, thankfully, Shirley Franklin, you remember her, she became the sewage mayor. She's an incredible woman. She didn't plan to come into office and just work for 8 years on sewers and water issues, but she saw that the city, if you can't bring clean water to businesses and people and take away the waste, you can't have a really prosperous growing city. And she also felt very responsible for all the mess that was being sent downstream to y'all. So we worked well with her and with the federal judge who found in our favor. And she raised the money, $2 billion spent at least to put infrastructure into the ground, to improve all the pipes, 2,000 miles of sanitary sewer pipes, picking up all the waste, bringing it to the plants, fixing something called combined sewers. And that's also described in the book. And she left office 2010, and by, I'd say, 2012-ish, the river out here dramatically cleaner. Riverkeeper organization is the only entity routinely monitoring the Chattahoochee River for bacteria, for E. coli, and also tributaries. And some of you may have been, I know Melanie has done some of the monitoring. Riverkeeper, you would think the government would be out there monitoring all our waterways, but they're not for a lot of reasons, I guess. So we raise money, and I say we, I've been retired 10 years, but we raise money to monitor so we can tell what's going on. And such a success story that this river has come back, and that the Riverlands project you probably know about, from Buford Dam down to this area, 100 miles that Trust for Public Land is working on, with new parks, trails, paddle trail and all that. The opportunities, new development along the river, you know, so we knew we were fighting not just for a cleaner environment, but also for more prosperity for everybody. So that's the kind of thing Riverkeeper organizations can do. As I said, we have floating classroom programs. We've taken 100,000 plus kids out. We love the program on West Point Lake. It's a newer program it started in 2015. The one on Lanier started in 2020. The organization, you know, does all the kinds of things you might think an environmental group would do every 2 minutes. Sorry, yeah, just or so. These are pictures from my walks I'll tell you about in a sec. And so 10 minutes and then we'll go to questions. Okay, we're fine. Okay, I wasn't sure. So anyway, so this is what a nonprofit organization does. And today there are more than 10,000 members. We're trying to help people understand more about water and about certainly all the kinds of things you all do to protect green spaces and native vegetation, and that sort of thing is absolutely critical. So I retired 10 years ago. Jason Ulseth is now the director and also the riverkeeper. He's an incredibly bright young man. He's the one who's put in all these phenomenal water testing programs that volunteers can participate in, and then the staff also do some of the work. So I retired, and about 5 years, I started teaching at Georgia Tech, one class once a year for grad students in water resources planning. And to you teachers out there, boy, that's hard. I mean, coming up with 30 classes. I mean, I only had 9 to 12 students, but it was like the amount of time I spent trying to prepare, because I couldn't just stand up and talk about, obviously, the Chattahoochee all the time. But I really enjoyed it, and I really tried hard to get this book and some of these issues into arenas with younger kids at universities and such. So I did that, and then I read A Forest Unseen by a man named Dr. David Haskell. Do you know this man? He's a scientist. He teaches at Sewanee. He's a brilliant writer. And a friend gave me this book, and it, you know, there's often something that's a spark that sets you off on a path, and literally. And in this book, he went into the forest up there near Sewanee every week for over a year, and he wrote about what he saw through the seasons. And he actually just went to one place. He called it his mandala, and it was like 1 square meter, so it was very small. And he wrote a 300-page book about this and what he saw. And it was so inspirational to me, because what it showed me was that all the time I've been in nature, paddling, hiking, and that sort of thing, I realized I hadn't really paid attention as much as I should. Sure, I'd see, okay, there's a beech tree, there's a whatever, but I didn't really mindfully look around and then ask questions about things, that I didn't know. And now with the internet, you can research just about anything. So I decided I was going to find a place, a trail. And of course, it was at the river. It was a trail I'd never walked before in the East Palisades unit up in the national park. And it's a trail that goes down to a huge bamboo forest, which of course is non-native, but it's there. You can't really do anything about it. It's been there a long time. And the walk trail along a little creek, Cabin Creek, down to the river, and then walked upstream. And, maybe 3/4 of a mile down and 3/4 back. And walking that trail starting in May 2019 for a little over a year really changed my life. I started learning. I had to unlearn hurrying because, in my job and everything, I was like, my boys and, you're not starting. I had to slow down and I had to really attune my eyes to look at the leaves and the different things around me. And I found things I had never seen before. And on this year plus that I walked, every single time I went, I would see something new. And so I kept a little journal. And this would be the fall of 2019, you know what's coming. And I started talking to friends, and I thought, who had been involved in writing books. And I like to write. I write a column in an Atlanta paper called Above the Waterline. I've been doing that for 9 years. But I'm not a professional writer, really, at all. And so my friend said, I think there's a story here, because what I wanted to do was in each chapter describe a walk down to the river and back, and then transition to a story to illustrate what and how we work to save the river. Because every time I would go, I would think, I remember when. And so I used this device of the nature writing to try to draw people into the watershed and think about, focus on the amazing life around us that we're a part of, the kinship we have to all species on this planet. And then I would transition into a story, as I said, and along the way, and you can just keep, along the way I would, I would tell these stories, and some are kind of, I don't know, harrowing in a way. There's political stuff in there. I talk a lot about the people who helped us along the way. I give a shout out to those who were real roadblocks too. My first draft, the people said to me, it needs to be more, the reviewers said, more personal, more colorful, tell more stories, be more honest, with what's going on. And don't just, tell the chronology or the facts. And so I worked on it real hard, and then COVID hit. And, elderly, sheltering at home. And I had all this time to pore over things that I'd kept from my career, to do research on the internet, and to write and redraft and write and redraft. It was so satisfying. Each one of us has stories to tell, and maybe we tell it in painting or poetry or in some other kind of art, or writing a book, or we don't even have to publish it. But I started out thinking, well, this will be something that my sons, when they're my age, maybe they'll read and say, wow, didn't know Mom did that. But then it turned out the University of Georgia was real interested, the UGA Press, because they do books about things in the region, and no one had done something like an environmental memoir like this about being a river keeper. And so I worked with them over quite a few years. It takes a while. And the book was published July of 2023. I'm very proud that it's in its third printing. There will be a paperback version, will come out next year. It was named this year one of the 10 books every Georgian should read, and was a finalist for some environmental awards too. But mostly, it was such a satisfying project to try to figure out, how can I tell, more or less average reader folks who are interested in the river, what we did and why, what we learned, where we failed, but also try to inspire them to get out and walk and connect with nature. And so I think I've really talked too much. There's a lot more, but I'd love your questions if that's okay. Yes, sir, or ma'am, I can't see. I can't see.
This is a multifaceted question.
Uh-oh.
First of all, are the river keepers responsible for notifying the public when the E. coli factor gets so high in the Chattahoochee?
The river keepers aren't responsible for anything. There's no law that set us up. We just got together like any nonprofit organization. The local governments, government agencies are the ones that would be authorized or responsible. And, but I don't think there's any requirement for them to do that. Well, that's what I'm saying. I think the State Environmental Protection Division, if there's like a sewage spill is reported, then they're supposed to put out a public notice now. But it is, the riverkeeper monitors all the waterways and puts everything up on the internet and does all of that at our own volition, just because we think there's a void and it needs to be there to help people understand what kind of quality our rivers and streams are. The Georgia Environmental Protection Division, EPD, is the entity that is charged under state law with protecting our waterways and with administering the Federal Clean Water Act throughout the state. They are very understaffed, to say the least. I'll add one other thing. There's a whole chapter in here. Roy Barnes, back in 1999, appointed me to the Georgia Board of Natural Resources. I was on for 7.5 long years, and in that role, I learned a lot about how our state manages our environmental agencies or doesn't. Second question, and then, yeah.
When the city of Atlanta or any other municipality is fined for damaging the river, where does the money go? Does it go in any facet to improve the problem that's created?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a very good question. It depends on where the fine, you know, is coming from. Under the Clean Water Act, depends what the violation is. If it's a violation under federal law, like we proved in federal court, the city of Atlanta was fined $2.5 million, and that went into the federal general treasury. The city had to also fix the problem, which cost over $2 billion. I live in the city. My rates and everybody else in the city were the highest in the country. We also negotiated with the city to do something called supplemental environmental projects, buy land to protect forever. And in the city, they did a trash cleanup of 37 miles of creeks and removed 568 tons of trash out of city streams. So the state can also take enforcement actions and can come up with a fine. And in that case, the fine would go to the state treasury. The state's fines are usually slaps on wrists.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. And this board that I used to be on, Roy Barnes, when he was governor, had campaigned that he would put people with science or environmental backgrounds, and there's Shirley Franklin there and me, that on this board of it now is 19 people. Because you would want to have, you would think, people with expertise on the board, because they're making policy decisions about air, land, and water. And they're also managing this EPD and other divisions within the state that pertain to natural resources. The last 3 governors, the appointments are 19 people. Every single one is a businessman or a businesswoman. There's no scientist, no biologist, no environmental engineer, no environmental educator, no anybody with any expertise. Rather than having a diversity of business and farming and science and, you know, environmentalists to make better decisions, it's a real problem. And so that's, you know, elections matter. I'm going to ask other people, can you hold yours since you had one? Yeah.
Chemically, what's in the mud in the bottom of the river?
Well, depends on where you're talking about, and I'd have to have it analyzed to really know what could possibly be in it.
Has the river been able to sweep itself clean to the bedrock, or is the mud still polluted?
Well, let's think about first bacteria. That's what most people care about, E. coli and bacteria. Okay, the bacteria live in the guts of mammals, right? Warm-blooded mammals. When it gets out and ends up, let's say, in a river, it's only going to live for a couple of days, because that's not its natural environment, right? Now, you don't want to be there on day one, but, you know, it's not going to persist, or you don't want to be there if it's continuously coming out, right? So the bacteria is absorbed basically into the environment, unless you've got ongoing, which is what we had up in Atlanta. It was just constant, not putting out the treated water. Now, in terms of other toxins, we've still got fish consumption advisories in West Point Lake and in the river. Haven't looked at them lately, but they pertain to chemicals that have been banned for 50 years. Chloridane, PCBs. You know, a lot of chemicals get approved before they really know what they're going to do to us. Now we've got the forever chemicals, the PFAS, the forever chemicals from foam and from other sorts of products, Teflon, that sort of thing. They're trying to figure out how to deal with that. That's not regulated under the Clean Water Act. So the sediment really depends on where you're talking about, what industries are nearby, and what might have you know, ended up in that. It's not going to be the same everywhere. Make sense? Kinda, sorta. You know, it's like the rivers change too, and the sediment flows down and around. It's like you take your blood pressure, it's not the same always, right? So a river, that's why you've got to keep monitoring it. You can monitor it one day and it might look awful. You keep monitoring, and if it was just a blip, okay, but if there's a trend, then that's when we go to the state, tell them what we found, try to resolve the problem, go to the local government because it's, you know, their responsibility, go to the media if we get no attention from anybody else, and then go to courts if we have to. Although that is a last resort, and it's expensive. And raising money, you know, for nonprofits you're involved with, it's not easy. Yes, was there somebody over here? Yes.
Did you guys ever use oysters for the cleanup? So I know New York City did for their water.
Right, but oysters aren't going to live up here in this environment, yeah, because they were talking about the bays up in New York, right? And then down like where I'm going tomorrow in Apalachicola, the oysters down there, because you've got a saltwater or salt and fresh environment, yeah. So, and that's an expensive endeavor. The Clean Water Act basically says you can discharge into our waterways if you're a city or you're an industry, but you have to treat your wastewater to a certain level of quality, and they get a permit. Every 5 years it's renewed to get a permit to discharge into a waterway. And part of what Riverkeeper does, when we started going through looking at all the permits. Lots of them, industries and cities were just like, you know, they weren't adhering to their permits, and the state wasn't doing anything about it.
Does Columbus get its water supply out of the Chattahoochee? Is it clean enough by that point?
Yeah, I understand, I'm pretty sure. It may get out of some tributaries, but I think it goes straight out of the river, I think, yeah. You know, West Point Dam sort of holds back a lot of stuff from getting all the way down to Columbus. Yes, sorry.
What are the variables you guys monitor at the bridges? You know, you have those sampling stations at the bridges. What are the components, like dissolved oxygen, DOD?
Yes, all of those things. And if you look on the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper website, you can find very easily, you look up under monitoring programs, you can look under neighborhood water watch, and you can find exactly where samples are taken every week and see what the parameters are. And so there's the neighborhood water watch. There's up on West Point Lake and Lake Lanier, we're monitoring for chlorophyll A, for algae. I mean, West Point Lake, it used to be, you know, the city of LaGrange gets their water out of West Point Lake, and at one point there was so much algae and stuff from all the junk coming down from Atlanta that it was dangerous to drink the water, and they had no drinking for a little while.
They're putting in a pumping station at the bridge near Whitesburg.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's coming to the Coweta water system. I believe it is. So there's a
Drinking water system, yeah. Well, I'm sure they're looking at what the water quality is, and then they're going to be treating it. There's also a Safe Drinking Water Act, which says when you pull the water out of the lake or a river, you got to treat it to certain levels. So, water is so critical, and we've got to let our local officials and state officials know that, we really expect them to give enough resources to these agencies so they can do what needs to be done to protect all of us.
Yeah, West Point Lake is down really low right now, if you've not been at West Point.
I haven't.
We're RVers, and we camp at
Uh-huh.
Schaefer Herd and the campgrounds there. They're working on the dam at West Point Lakes. They had to lower the lake levels.
Okay.
They had to work on the dam, so if you go to West Point Lake now, they're missing a lot of water. The boats, there's a lot of water missing out of that lake.
Yeah, that lake's been down even lower though, back if you weren't here in 2006 to 2009. And that's the thing, when there's not enough for what everybody wants, I'll call it everybody's greeds, everybody up and down the basin. When there's less, you've got to figure out how to share. It's what you teach your kids. So how do you figure out, well, okay, I'll take 10% less and you'll take 10% less or whatever. And, Atlanta's the big behemoth, right, up there. Got a lot of lawyers who've been fighting for a long time to keep all the water up in Lake Lanier. Chattahoochee Riverkeeper on the water quantity issues, we've been fighting for y'all for 30 years to get enough clean water coming down stream from Atlanta for people and wildlife. And that, I'd say that's the thing we've spent vastly more time and money on really over the years, because it's fair, it's right, it's moral, and it's what's required by the law. Yes, okay, here and then you, yeah. Yeah, you first, yes.
I just wondered, has anyone monitored species recovery, like maybe amphibians and things like that?
Yeah.
What has happened since?
Right, we wish there was a lot more analysis, but state budget writers don't really like to put a lot of money into environmental studies and looking at critters and such as that, but there's some that goes on, and it's mentioned in my book, the U.S. Geological Survey, which is a great science agency, national federal science agency, and a guy who's my friend who's been monitoring right down around Weisberg, I think, for 20 years. He has a quote in the book where he says, this river is so much better than it was, and I'm finding mussels and different things that I had not found before, and seeing species, because it's the whole web of life. So, but what I didn't tell you, and if we just have another minute and then a couple more questions, we got a problem in Atlanta again, though. Maybe you've read something about it. Everything was going great, but it turns out that after Shirley Franklin left office and we had Kasim Reed and then Keisha Lance Bottoms and now Andre Dickens as our mayors, they and the various city councils started working on other stuff. They didn't really pay too much attention to the water program. They thought, everything's working along, Shirley fixed it. Well, you can't just fix something once and think that it's done forever, right? Anybody who has a house knows that that's not true, So you've got to maintain, you've got to operate things well. And Jason found about a little over a year ago, he was monitoring. The only people monitoring downstream of this big Orem Clayton sewage treatment plant, and he was pulling samples and found bacteria and stuff and a mess. And it led one thing to the other. He called the state, he called the feds at EPA. Took months to try to get through to anybody. And it turns out that big Orem Clayton plant that had been completely overhauled and was doing great had been allowed by some bunch of people over the years to fall apart again. It's like, buying a Ferrari or something and you run it into the ground and you just don't. And I tell you, when last March, the state did one really great thing. They did an unannounced visit to the city's plant, the Orem Clayton plant. And they wrote up a report, and we got, of course, reporters in the Atlanta paper, because you got to have good relationships with the media to get the word out. And I read that report that talked about how bad things were at this big sewage treatment plant, and I almost cried. You can't imagine the effort that we have all made over so many years. So the Riverkeeper went to the mayor, went to all these people, you know, here's the data, we want to work with you, you know, we got engineers now, we're bigger, you know, and pretty much got blown off, pretty much. So guess what we had to do in early September? We filed suit in federal court again about this particular problem. Now, the river is not anywhere back to how it was 30 years ago. This is this one plant, and yes, it's a big plant, but they had, it's inexcusable as somebody who lives and pays taxes and all that in the city of Atlanta, that this was allowed to happen. But you know, you don't oversee folks, and you know, put in people, well, Kasim put in a woman who's ended up in federal court for, in federal, not court, she's in prison, for taking bribes. I mean, it's just, so groups like Riverkeeper have to be here all the time. You know, cheer everybody when things are going well, and you know, we all work together, and that happens a lot. But when things go back and sour again, you try to work with them, and if you can't, then you're just gonna, I will tell you, Riverkeeper will get this thing fixed. We have that, as Congress does not do anything to it. Remember I said this. Remember I said that. That law allows us to get into federal court. Otherwise, if we didn't have the Federal Clean Water Act, we didn't have our little organization, we didn't have the media, a great mayor in Shirley Franklin, and a community of support in Atlanta and downstream, we would not have been able to achieve what we've been able to achieve. But the key was the Federal Clean Water Act, you know, gave us that tool. And I've blabbed on forever. I can't see what time it is, but, there's one or two, you had a question, another one, yes. I said.
When you were learning about the Chattahoochee, did you come across any information on the severe drought of 1925?
Of the what?
The severe drought.
Of 1925? No, I don't know that much about it. I don't think I do.
It was so bad that two of my great uncles drove either a Model T or a Model A across the Chattahoochee up to Sandy Springs and came back across.
I'm not surprised.
And my dad walked across the Chattahoochee
Yeah.
as a 5-year-old.
Uh-huh. It's a shallow river. It's like 4 feet deep up there. I mean, people are shocked when they come from other big cities around the country and they say, this is what 5 million people are relying on? This is crazy. And it probably wasn't just a deep drought, because I have been told, by a number of people, before Beaufort Dam was built and Lake Lanier, which is very deep, was created, people would routinely walk across the Chattahoochee. You didn't have trout in it, you had bass, you know, so. You guys have been really great, and I'm going to stick around if you have other questions. I have my book. Thank you. If you're interested, it's $25, cash, check, or Venmo, and I'm happy to sign it, and it does make great holiday gifts.
Thank you again, Sally, for coming tonight. And as she just said, she does have several copies of her book up here. They are $25 cash, check, or Venmo, and I'm sure she'd be happy to sign one, and she'll be available for a few minutes for some one-on-one questions. We're going to move on to door prizes. Remember, you do have to register